We're here with Rhonda Miller, the head of the Speak Up for Ben Association and the OASIS Community Center, which we are in right now. Thank you so much for having us on a Saturday morning.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we just went on a tour of the space. It's this stunningly beautiful space. It's a calming space. It's a welcoming space. And so we're going to definitely get into more about all the different services that are provided here. But it's an inspiration, really, and a really great thing that the community has available to it that I don't know that a lot of people are fully aware of.
No, it's the best kept secret. We want to change that.
I was going to say, let's do our best to make it not a secret anymore,
That's right.
Especially based on the importance of the themes and what it provides. But why don't we start with yourself? So if I understand it right, grew up in the D.C. area, had some time in California, had your children there, and then moved here to the Bethlehem area about 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Both of my children were born in the Bay Area of California. My boys love to tell people they're California boys. But we moved back east 30 years ago when our son Ben was 3 months old.
Wow.
And he grew up right here in the Lehigh Valley in Bethlehem, just in the same house we've lived in for 30 years.
Wow. And so all of your kids, if you don't mind saying.
Yeah. So we have two sons, Alex, who is now 35. He lives in Baltimore City. And Ben, who would be 32 if he were with us still.
Got it. Yeah. And so the majority of this story will follow Ben's journey, but obviously yours as well, because that's even some of the important aspects of what this place has become. But so Ben became like a vibrant, thriving young man. He was involved in soccer, involved in music. In fact, this is a picture of him and his guitar. And so that was where this became such an interesting kind of organization for me to learn about when I saw it. But again, we'll touch on that in a second. But because he was a musician.
Yeah, Ben was a very dynamic personality, full of life and vigor, enthusiasm, joy.
Yep.
But also a very sensitive person.
Sure.
He was very creative in many, many ways, but music was really his love. He was a self-taught musician. He took guitar lessons, but then he was a self-taught keyboardist and helped launch a popular regional band here in the Lehigh Valley. Yeah,
and I think the important reason why I wanted to make sure we touch on that was this was someone probably perceived as not struggling.
Yeah, you would never know it. He looked like the boy next door. Always had a beaming smile, super friendly, outgoing, very caring person.
Yep.
And I think that was part of. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with when they have mental health issues. It's easy to conceal it.
Yeah.
Right behind a smile, not let everybody know what exactly is going on inside. So,
and it may be just, I'm just having a bad day inside. Or it might be, I don't want to burden somebody else with this stuff. Or it might be the stigma of, I don't want to acknowledge this publicly. It could be any of those reasons. And in an adolescent, it's that much more probably pressure of peer pressures and such around.
Yeah. As you pointed out, Ben was an athlete. He was a rising soccer star. He had ambitions to get a scholarship full ride to a college and play soccer there, as well as he wanted to study music business.
Yep.
He wanted to become a professional in the music industry.
Yep.
So that was his aspiration. But when he was in his 15th year, as you pointed out, many adolescents struggle. It's a time of a lot of turmoil emotionally for kids, and that's when I think that inside of him he was battling greater wars than we knew, than everyone around him was aware of.
Yeah, and again, whatever you're comfortable sharing, but basically, it seemed like there also was some other things that happened, a tragic death of a coach and so on that probably influenced some other struggles. But the introduction to drugs, because this path does lead down a drug addiction path, was from wisdom teeth being removed.
Yeah, it's hard to actually say where his drug use began. I believe it began with just, friends from school, friends in the band, just experimenting. But then when he was 17, he had his wisdom teeth removed. He already was dealing with substance use issues at that time.
Okay, gotcha.
And he had just
But so much easier when they give it to you in that form.
Well, he had been in treatment, actually. He was in his first rehab when he was 17.
Wow.
And it was a 28-day program, and he got out 4 months later, had his wisdom teeth removed. And I advised the oral surgeon, no strong pain medications. Well, there was complications with the surgery. They had to go back in and do surgery again. And this time they prescribed him opioids.
Got it. Yeah, and that not that long ago was a much more wheeling and dealing scenario of what the pharmaceutical companies needed or wanted
That's
to see
right.
happen. Yeah.
You know, doctors were often over-prescribing opioids.
Sure.
And now we're going back a little ways. We're talking 2009, 2010, and that time era. There's some tighter controls on now, which is a really good thing. But opioids were being just like overprescribed left and right.
Yeah. And you had mentioned something when we were walking around that up and until drug use was introduced, he was a different kid, and it just seemed to unlock something in him when that happened.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times he would say to me, you know, Mom, I feel normal when I use a substance. It changes something in me.
Right.
And a lot of people that use substances do say that they don't feel comfortable in their own skin. But then when they use a substance, you know, whatever it is, it kind of releases some inhibitions. And, you know, he had experienced that. I think it helped, you know, quell some of the anxiety he had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we now pivoted a little bit to the music side, obviously there is a bias or a stigma around rock and roll or music or whatever. But there is just simply the undeniable fact that at a minimum, early on, you're mostly performing in bars. Even when it is a venue, there is alcohol available. So it is for someone who does struggle, it's an added element of difficulty to be a gigging musician who then maybe can't say no or feels that same way of, I'll just need a little bit.
That is a real struggle when you work in the music industry. When you're in that field, you are surrounded by alcohol and drugs. I mean, it is just the way it is. And for musicians who really want to abstain, it's a challenge. And they need a lot of support.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
And the support part, I think, is also maybe where things started to spiral for Ben, in that the band kicks him out and the doctors stop prescribing him things and goes cold turkey.
That's exactly right. He, you know, his band friends, of course, he was using with them. That was part of the culture. And his addiction, though, accelerated. To the point where he was not showing up for practices. He may have been late for shows. And it was really conflicting with the band's schedule. So, the band just said, like, that's it. You can't even participate fully the way we need you to. Because of the drugs.
Yes, and I think the other part here is you weren't unaware. You knew that he was struggling with these things. You were supportive of getting him the help he needed. And yet it still went down a path.
Yeah, I mean, we had access to, you know, psychologists, therapists, psychiatric support, treatment. He had been in and out of treatment. The treatment system is, you know, it was not very good in those days. It's getting better. It's getting better, but you really need a lot of support and a lot of understanding, which we provided to him. But I think that, you know, when you're struggling with an addiction or a mental health issue, it is really oftentimes difficult to open up, to be vulnerable, feel safe, because there's so much stigma. And, you know, when you get up and you fall down, and then you get up and you fall down, you just feel like a failure. And I think he probably struggled with that, just feeling like, you know, here we go again, he relapsed again. And, you know, there's got to be so much compassion extended to somebody who's struggling with mental health issues and substance issues.
So one of the musicians on the lineup, and you'll hear this on Friday and Saturday during the performances, but one thing she always points out, because her husband struggled and then passed with a heroin addiction, and she said you have to remember that every person who's, like, if you see someone on the street and have some sort of a biased reaction to that, that's someone's child, that's someone's husband or wife or whatever. Like, that is someone who is a person of love for someone out there.
That's right. You know, it's easy to put labels on people.
Right.
And easy to pass judgment. That's how the world works.
Right.
But we have to always remember these are people,
Yeah.
person first. So we avoid language like addict, which is a highly stigmatizing term. You know, we use different language like a person who lives with a substance use disorder, a person who lives with alcohol use disorder,
Yep.
rather than calling them a drunk or a, addict or
Yep.
druggie. Those are horrible stigmatizing terms.
Correct. Yeah, and words are important. The other thing that Cass talks about, and this is where, things turn even darker, is that heroin is so readily available and very cheap on the streets, and that's where Ben starts to turn when he doesn't have anything else available.
Yeah, Ben, he always promised himself that he would only go so far with drugs, and he would never use heroin. And yet, when he was cut off from Suboxone, which he was being medically prescribed to curtail his cravings for the prescribed opioids that he was being administered by doctors with legitimate prescriptions, he was cut off from that, and then really at that point felt like he had no choice but turn to the street.
Sure.
And street heroin, super cheap. But today, it's largely fentanyl that's out there.
Right.
There really isn't even heroin on the streets anymore.
Yeah, and that's where things. But
Yeah.
you're pretty sure that it was fentanyl that took his life.
Oh, it was. Ben was in treatment, and he was doing really, really well. And he was prematurely discharged because he was doing so well. The insurance company said Ben is doing so well that he no longer needs this level of care. And so we no longer pay for inpatient. Out he goes, he'll do outpatient. So out he went, got an apartment with another young man from his treatment center. And the first day, he got in his car and drove to we don't know where down. And he thought he got heroin. It was 100% fentanyl.
Wow.
So in today's world, it's extremely risky. Anything you buy on the street, even marijuana on the street, laced with fentanyl, and it takes very, very little, like a microscopic bit of fentanyl to take somebody's life.
Wow. So, sorry for even asking you to tell that story, and for the loss. But I think that's where you find a pathway yourself. So like now we'll kind of pivot more to you and the family working through that grief. Obviously end up in extremely dark places. Yeah. Struggling with the whys and the what fors and
I fought for my child's life for 8 long and arduous years right alongside of him, giving him every support I could find. And it's been the most devastating experience of my life. And I can't imagine anything more devastating than losing a child.
of course.
We lost Ben August 1st, 2016, 1 week before his 24th birthday.
Wow.
And that sent me into a very dark place. I fell into a deep, debilitating depression.
Of course.
And I felt like I had no purpose any longer for living.
Yeah.
I wasn't suicidal, but I just, my whole life was my son, helping my son. Our oldest son, he hadn't had issues like that, and he's always been very independent and doing very well in life. So it was like helping Ben that was my focus.
There's the various stages of working through that and guilt and rage and all this different stuff, but at some point you actually start to harness it and turning into a positive anger.
Yeah, for me, like I said, I fell into a dark, dark depression and kind of was in that place, but processing my grief, getting support, going to grief groups and counseling and whatnot. But about 2 years in, I was invited to Purdue Pharmaceutical's headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, along with hundreds of families who lost their loved one.
Wow.
And we had a protest march. And it garnered national attention, and it was the start of change with, what was going on with Purdue Pharmaceuticals. That is when I found the inner healthy anger,
Right.
Really. And I started to see, like, this is so much bigger than Ben just making bad decisions.
Sure.
You know, it was not about Ben making bad decisions. Ben had a serious substance use disorder, which is a medical disease.
Yes.
It changes the brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And once I realized, you know, the bigger picture of the public health crisis that the pharmaceutical industry has created,
Yep.
I started getting involved with advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I started, going to marches and protesting and whatnot.
And is this where the Speak Up for Ben
Yeah, we launched
organization
launched our nonprofit in December of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
We named it Speak Up for Ben, for all the Bens out there.
Sure.
Because Ben, even though he was an outgoing personality, he had great difficulty finding his voice and speaking up and advocating for his own needs.
Yep.
So our son, Alex, named it Speak Up for Ben. He found that
That's
Ben formed an acronym, Break the Silence, End the Stigma, Never Forget. And that's kind of in short, the mission of our nonprofit. And so we do education in the community and help break the stigma because people aren't talking about it. And that's why I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing with this show, because it's so important for people to recognize that there's no shame in having mental health struggles.
Sure.
We all do in some way, shape, or form at various times in our life. There's no shame in developing a substance use disorder because there is help available.
Yep.
And it's breaking the stigma and having these open, honest conversations.
Yeah. And no shame asking for help. I think that's like that most important step of self-advocacy or accepting it from someone else who's insisting, hey, you probably need some help here. Just take the help.
Yeah.
If you find it afterwards you don't need it, that's fine. But knowing that you might never accept it is the tragedy.
Yeah, and one thing that's important to realize is a disease such as substance use disorder, it's a disease of progression.
Yeah.
So, you can't ignore it like, I've got this big job or project or this, album I'm creating. Now is not a good time. Later. If you don't take care of it now, it'll just continue to progress.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the parallels to physical health are like the more we can think about these two things as needing the same attention and care all the time is going to help out. Because like if you're not physically well, but you're like, it won't be a problem. If you're waiting for it to become a medical issue, that's too late. Not too late. You can still help, but like it'd be way better to avoid that moment of I'm now in a point of crisis.
When Ben's addiction first became known to us when he was 17 years old, I explained to him, it's similar to like even a cancer. If you catch it early, you can get rid of it, you can curtail it, and you can move on and have a successful life.
Yep.
But if you don't deal with it, then it progressively will get worse and worse by various stages.
Yes.
And that's the same thing with a substance use disorder.
Yeah.
There actually are medical stages.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're absolutely right that would be a great way to look at it. Because that could help you also feel like those remissions aren't your fault. Like it's, there are elements to it that are medically provable. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for that. So tell us about this space. So OASIS Community Center, how do you find the space and how do you start to move into it?
Yeah, so when we opened our nonprofit, Speak Up for Ben, we got involved with working with Northampton County Drug and Alcohol Division. Just, I really wanted to educate the community.
Yep.
So I approached them and asked them to partner with me on some projects that we were working on.
Yep.
We quickly garnered their attention for the work we were doing, and they offered us a contract to open the first family recovery center in Pennsylvania and quite likely the nation. And we call it OASIS Community Center. What's unique about it is it's a support for anybody who is impacted by somebody else's substance use. Okay, so it's largely families, but it could be friends, it could be, some folks, it's coworkers, neighbors, even a bandmate. If you're concerned about somebody else's use of drugs or alcohol and you need support, this is what we exist for.
Yeah.
We offer evidence-based education.
Yep.
which is so important because we utilize a different approach than what I was taught when Ben's addiction came
And
out.
not that long ago.
Not that long ago. So, there's sort of this attitude of what they call like tough love, kick them out, make them do this, make them do that, let them face the consequences of their actions. But that can be, in today's world of fentanyl, devastating and a sentence of death.
Sure.
So we really advocate for folks to really understand the medical disease of substance use disorder, which we teach. And then we teach them communication skills and, really having an approach of compassion for people that are struggling.
Totally. Yeah. And first of its kind.
We are the first of its kind. We hope that this model will be replicated throughout Pennsylvania and across the country because it's so needed. We serve about 4,000 folks every year that come through our doors. Everything that we offer is at no cost to the public. We have counseling groups. We have educational programs. We have a lot of support programs. And then we have a focus on wellness.
Sure.
So we understand that, the family system gets broken down when there's substances involved. And we need to rebuild and heal. So we have a heavy focus on building wellness, resiliency skills, coping skills, and then finding joy again.
Yeah.
Because when you're worried constantly about somebody you care about, it can really rob you of joy.
Totally. Yeah, that stress of not knowing what that next phone call or text would be about. Yeah. And by first of its kind, I meant it's focused on the support system, the family or the loved ones, not necessarily the person going through it, and available whether it's currently happening or post a loss like what you had to experience.
That's right. When I initially had the vision of opening this center, I was thinking, grief support, because we are in a public health crisis of epidemic fatal overdoses.
Yes.
And right here in the Lehigh Valley, it's the numbers are alarming.
Yep.
So initially I was going to open like a grief support center, but then once I started realizing my entire journey with my son, grief began the day that I became aware that there was a problem.
Yeah.
So, folks that are living alongside somebody they care about with a mental health issue they're struggling with or a substance issue, it's a period of grief.
Sure.
And so we do offer a lot of support for that.
Right. And so I also wanted to point out, so it doesn't have to be, the addiction side of it doesn't have to be substance abuse or addiction. It can be any of the other possible addictions.
Well, there's many different addictions, as we're all aware. I mean, of course, we think largely of substances, opioids, largely, alcohol addiction. But, people have gambling addictions, internet shopping. There's all kinds of different addictions. We call those process addictions. We don't treat those here. We are on the side of treating, or rather supporting, the friends and the family who have a loved one. And we help connect them, the families and friends, to supports for their loved ones.
Right.
We have a lot of resources available today.
I just wanted people to feel welcome to come here if it is gambling or video games or sex. Like, there are different elements to this where it's like, whatever the struggle is, it's welcome to be supported.
Our doors are open to everyone. And we do, by the way, have a lot of folks that come here that are in recovery themselves from substance use of various kinds. But they also have loved ones.
That's right.
Or friends,
because it often is a genetic predisposition.
Absolutely. And so we consider ourselves like resource brokers. So
For free.
everything that we offer is no cost. And we provide a myriad of services and supports. But if we don't have what an individual needs, we find that resource and direct them to it.
Yeah. So where I saw the Speak Up for Ben posters was over during Music Fest on the Arts Quest campus. And I think those are the elements of awareness that I think are extremely helpful, because without that poster, I never would have reached out to connect to learn more about it.
Yeah, you're referring to what we call Angels of the Valley banner project that we partner with Arts Quest and Lehigh Valley Hospital Network to produce. That project features photographs of beautiful people throughout our community who lost their lives to addiction.
Yep.
And with short little biographical sketches. The banners are displayed beginning on August 31st, which is International Overdose Awareness Day.
Got it.
And they are kept up through the month of September, which is National Recovery Month.
Right.
So we are highlighting, when people walk by these fences at the Steel Stacks campus and they see all these banners and like, wow, what is this?
Yes.
All these beautiful people, like what's going on? These
Yep.
beautiful young people. And then they start reading and they start looking and then they eventually get it and they're like, oh my gosh, this is not the druggie, in the dark
Sure.
alley that, maybe stereotypically people think of
Yep.
with addiction. These are the boys and girls in our community, the ones next door, the ones you work with,
Yep.
the ones that your kids go to school with.
Yep.
And they're, beautiful people who, many of them just wonderful, highly successful people that got pulled into addictions.
Yeah. So if you see that walking around in September, definitely take a moment to honor those memories and learn a little bit about those people. Last thing I would want to cover here is obviously, since you're giving these services out for free, they don't cost you nothing. So I want to make sure people understand that this being a nonprofit, they can donate money, they can donate time.
Yeah.
And so whatever they might have from a resource standpoint to be able to give, where can they learn more about the organization and maybe make a donation?
Yeah. So we are a 501c nonprofit organization, Speak Up for Ben, and then we operate the OASIS Community Center. We charge nothing for our services, and we want everyone to know they are welcome, even if they don't feel like they have somebody with addiction. Maybe they're just not sure. They want more information. Just come into our doors. Our website is oasisbethlehem.org.
Got it.
And that's for OASIS Community Center. And the website for our nonprofit is speakupforben.org.
And we'll link to all of that here.
And yes, we, volunteers are needed. We're kind of like a little mom and pop organization here. So we do rely on community support that
Of
way.
course, yeah, as everyone does. So yeah, please learn more about the organization. You'll be down at the event on Friday at the Ice House.
Yes.
So there'll be several tabling organizations. We'll share that out, obviously, here on the show. But people can come and stop by the table and learn more about both the organization as well as the center on Friday night or at any time they can stop by.
Yeah, we're in a beautiful 224-year-old stone farmhouse on the Monocacy Creek. It's just a beautiful, serene, peaceful location.
Basically right off 512. It's a beautiful spot. You're going to want to come check it down, and wonderful, beautiful services that you're providing.
Thank you.
Rhonda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
There's the car by the bridge where nobody goes. Keep on laughing with every blow. Is it wrong